to the How to Recover Tourism Research Relevance After COVID-19 webinar, co-organized by TTRA and the U.S. Asia Center for Tourism and Hospitality Research at Temple University in Philadelphia. This is part of the online forums organized by TTRA. My name is Xiang Robert Lee. I'm a professor and director of Temple University's U.S. Asia Center for Tourism and Hospitality Research. The center is committed to conduct translational research that links different disciplines, connects academics and practitioners, and builds bridges between the East and West. Many professional disciplines debate and struggle with the issue of rigor and relevance. Tourism academics seem to be in a particularly awkward position. Colleagues from mainstream disciplines think that we are not rigorous enough. Yet, those industry friends consider our research not relevant. The latter seems to be even more obvious and worrisome during this pandemic. What I heard from colleagues, usually two types of voices. One is that some of the colleagues feel powerless during this pandemic because when a major crisis like this happening, they would love to contribute something, but it is uncertain whether the industry really needs our research and how our research can contribute and can contribute in an actionable manner. Other colleagues are not worrying about that much because they believe tourism and researchers do not have to be the handmaid of the practitioners. In other words, it's not academics' primary responsibility to provide hands-on operational tips to the industry. And during this COVID-19 pandemic, are tourism academics losing relevance? What kind of relevance are we pursuing? After the pandemic, how can we ensure our research is relevant and impactful and meaningful? In this time of uncertainty and disorientation, we naturally turn to intellectual leaders of our field for their guidance. This is why we set up this webinar. We're truly grateful and excited that our three distinguished speakers agreed to participate in this webinar. Today's webinar will be organized this way. First of all, we will have our three speakers to speak for about 10 minutes. Some of them have their PowerPoint and they will share their insights. And after that, we will open the floor and ask questions, and including some of the questions submitted before the webinar when our attendees register, or some questions that people share on the chat box. I don't think, so during this, the first session, during the first part when our speakers speaking, please mute yourself and make sure that our speakers get your entire undivided attention. So first of all, let me introduce our first distinguished speaker, Dr. Marian Job. Marian is a professor in the School of Hospitality, Food and Tourism Management, University of Guelph, Canada. Marian specializes in destination planning, development, and marketing, and the experiences upon which destination build. She has extensive private and public sector experiences, have worked for financial institutions, tour operators, consulting groups, and government prior to joining academia. A 30-year veteran of TTRA, she has served as President, TTRA Canada, as well as TTRA International. Welcome, Professor Marian Job. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert. Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm going to basically address 4 topics in my brief remarks. I'm going to talk about the need to go beyond disciplinary thinking, TTR's role in enabling relevancy, since that really is the topic of the day, the ever-changing landscape of tourism, and ensuring relevancy now and in the future. So let's start with the need to go beyond disciplinary thinking and addressing this criticism that you talked about, Robert, that, you know, colleagues from mainstream disciplines think we're not rigorous enough, and those in industry consider our research not relevant. As you said, I have quite a bit of industry and public sector experience, and yet I've never quite understood the need to be everything to everyone. We always talk about how multidisciplinary the study of tourism is. And indeed, it's probably the only subject where you find academics located in so many different departments. Back in the 80s, Jafar Jafari did a lot of work on teasing out those disciplinary inputs into tourism. And I think he came up with something like 21 different ones, ranging from environmental studies, you know, to business and law and everything in between. It's impossible to be an expert in each and every one of these fields of study. And yet, as tourism scholars, we must at least have some knowledge, as we are expected to understand the impacts, contributions, and relationships between each one. And now we have to wade knee-deep into a new one, epidemiology, to be able to talk somewhat knowledgeably about the reproduction or R0 value and K or dispersion factor of SARS-CoV-2. To do so, we have to have industry experience? I don't think so. We should, if we are teaching operational topics in a business program. And these days, there's a great need for in-depth research in this area, whether we're trying to help businesses address the mental stress and physical safety of their employees, or how they can innovate and still turn a profit with 30 to 50% fewer customers in a restaurant. But is industry experience necessary or even helpful in every discipline? Personally, I doubt that. Tom Selwyn just posted a couple of days ago a note on a course that is being offered this summer on the role of travel, tourism, and pilgrimage in cultural history's heritage. I really don't think you need to have experience running a business to probe the symbolism, ritual, and interfaith relations this course explores. But cultural heritage formation is critical knowledge in a whole range of professions. The greater danger, I think, than whether someone has industry experience is sticking to disciplinary boundaries and conforming to that established culture. This might meet the criteria for excellence established by the member's department, often reinforced by journals that regularly impose very traditional rules for what type of research is accepted for publication. But to understand tourism, one has to be able to conceptualize beyond one's own discipline, as insights are gained by interacting with those weaker networks in different geographies, contexts, disciplines, which provide fresh and new perspective. This, of course, opens us up to criticism that our scholarship is beset by many ontological, epistemological, and methodological shortcomings because it doesn't conform to the established rules. We will need even more courage to confront this kind of criticism, as the times we live in will challenge us to go beyond that to the next level thinking, open to innovation, outsider positioning, and disruption. So what is TTRA's role in enabling this relevancy? To me, the value of an association like TTRA, and why I'm a 30-year veteran, is that it brings together academics, DMOs, and suppliers. As an academic, it keeps me grounded in what challenges DMOs face and the types of solutions suppliers propose. The often heated discussions around the appropriateness of certain methodologies, many of these led by academics, is an instant window into the worlds of human thinking and behavior, AI, predictive modeling, and other esoteric approaches. While not my worlds, they certainly impact my understanding of where society and therefore tourism is heading. At the same time, it exposes me to work being done by emerging and established colleagues, much of which is being undertaken in collaboration with NGOs as well as public and private sector organizations on the ground, with concrete impact. Talk about relevance. And then, of course, there are the many models adopted by universities that engage in one form of outreach or another, where working with all types of stakeholders is the norm, and where the academics brilliantly bridge theory with practice. We just don't have English language journals that value these approaches enough. Now to the ever-changing landscape of tourism. Every year or so, David Edgell puts together a list of the 10 most important world tourism issues by canvassing the TriNet membership. I'm sure you're all familiar with this because it generally gives rise to much debate on TriNet. And this year's topic or last year, I should say, topic du jour was over-tourism, which probably would have made it onto the list for 2020. It was accompanied by ever louder voices clamoring for local engagement in destination planning. And yet, academics have been pointing out the need to work with the hosts to ensure the protection of their culture and an equitable share of the benefits for over 50 years. But the neoliberal agenda had little time for anything but the economic benefits to business and governments. Even environmental initiatives had to be framed as good for the bottom line. I wonder how the populations of these places feel today, where there are no tourists. Are they happy to have their home cities, cultural and natural heritage sites back? Are they taking this enforced pause in travel to make politicians and destination leadership rethink their approach to tourism when travel becomes once again possible? This is the time to show them how relevant academic research can be. But we shouldn't assume that attitudes and behaviors will be the same. Indeed, we must reconfirm or refute much of what we have believed to be true. Travel has been considered high touch, and yet all the new health and safety directives call for touchless and even contactless experiences. Half the workforce in tourism-related jobs has been furloughed or let go. Many of them will not be brought back, even if travel picks up again, because technology will have replaced them in one form or another. How will visitors respond? And what will happen to those workers? In many countries, they would have few alternative opportunities to earn a living. The old industrial model was too often exploitative and disenfranchised local populations. This is the opportunity to do things differently, as many have come to realize that there were many things wrong with the priorities pursued and are desirous of not going back to normal, i.e. the way things were. As we're struggling to cope with this Schumpeterian creative destruction of our economic premises, maybe, just maybe, this is our moment for relevancy. After all, epidemiologists who have warned us about a coming pandemic for years without being heeded have just become very relevant, even though their advice keeps constantly shifting. And we're okay with that, as we realize that science is not absolute when confronted with the unknown. But somehow we think we must have all the answers to a dynamic phenomenon like tourism. So how do we ensure relevancy now and in the future? As humans, we crave certainty, but that is an illusion, as the existential threats from climate change to mass extinction of biodiversity and now SARS-CoV-2 pile up. None are going away, but our news cycle has pushed them aside. So it's easy to feel like your current research isn't relevant, and maybe you do need to rethink what you are focusing on. But we also know that the effects on travel and tourism of any of these human-induced disruptions like the pandemic are our short, medium, and long-term reality. You've probably all seen Jeffrey Crouch's email outlining the new COVID-19 requirements for manuscripts that the Journal of Travel Research has added to its aims and scope. Authors are now expected to acknowledge and discuss the relevance and usefulness of pre-COVID-19 research in light of COVID-19 developments. While this and the other related requirements are understandable, epidemiologists are telling us that we can expect many more pandemics as our population continues to expand, urbanization is intensifying, and the living space for non-human species is shrinking. So really what we should be addressing is not just COVID-19, but rather ensuring the resilience of humans' desire to travel and the destination's resilience to mitigate and adapt to the changes imposed by all of these impacts, whether they are sudden like the pandemic or long-term like climate change. To be relevant, I don't think it's enough for articles to address the effect of COVID-19 on their interpretations and conclusions for a post-COVID-19 travel and tourism world, but rather how the research will contribute to longer-term resilience. One way to do this is by building networks, preferably internationally for a more global perspective, certainly multidisciplinary to bring expertise to complement our own, and build collaborations that cross the lines between academia and broadly defined industry. This includes consulting companies and other suppliers of research who often sit on a treasure trove of data that can be analyzed well beyond what they have the time and capacity to do. Just think of STR and their efforts to make their global hospitality data and analytics available to academics and students. Their longitudinal data, again, allows for so many types of trend analyses, comparative, and to some extent, even predictive studies. Working with this kind of data also prepares students for a whole range of professions beyond what we too often see as the industry. So I'll leave it at that for now, and I look forward to our Q&A session.
Thank you so much, Marianne. And next, I would like to introduce Professor Alan Liu. Alan is a professor emeritus at Northern Arizona University and is a founding editor-in-chief of the journal Tourism Geographies. His background encompasses human geography, urban planning, and tourism studies. His recent interests and writings have focused on placemaking, resilience, and consciousness studies as they relate to travel and tourism. Welcome to Alan.
Thank you, Robert. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay. So I'm drawing upon resilience here. Title of my paper is Resilience, Relevance, presentations, Resilience, Relevance, and Reorganizing Tourism Research Post-COVID-19. And you can download this presentation along with some other recent ones I've done at alanliu.com/presentations. So, in case you have an interest. This is the resilience adaptive cycle. It's a fairly simple model, but I think it has a lot of insight. It basically has 4 stages. It usually starts in the lower left corner with organization or reorganization, and then it moves into a growth phase, a consolidation phase, and a collapse phase. So as tourism scholars and students, I think we're all almost everybody in this webinar is probably familiar with Butler's tourism area life cycle, which is basically the same thing. It starts with an organization or exploration phase. There's a rapid growth phase. There's a consolidation phase where things structures get kind of laid in place, rules are established. And then there's the potential for collapse. The one benefit of the way Butler has it laid out here is he does show that you don't have to collapse. And that's also true here. It is possible to cycle through these upper 3 quarters here and avoid the collapse. However, today we are basically in the collapse. We are in this collapse crisis energy release phase right here because of COVID-19. Now on the right here, I have some of the major variables that are associated with each of these phases of the adaptive cycle. And here's the collapse phase here. There are three basic variables. Resilience, which is the capacity to innovate and adapt. Potential, which is the capacity to accumulate resources, and connectedness, which is the capacity to manage and control. And in this collapse phase, everything kind of falls apart that we're used to. The capacity to innovate and adapt, we really don't know what's going on. We feel lost, we feel powerless. There's the capacity to use accumulated resources. We don't have access to those resources like we used to have. And so we have, that's at a very low point. And then the connectedness, capacity to control and manage, declines rapidly from the consolidation phase, which is all about control and management. That declines considerably until it completely disappears by the end of this, this collapse. So that's where we are now. And because of that, there's this perceived irrelevance. It's not just tourism research, it's basically society in general. All of our institutions are seen as irrelevant. I mean, this may be more true for countries that are struggling more with the COVID-19, addressing the issues related to COVID-19 than those that have been more successful, but still, internationally, many of our institutions, government institutions, higher education institutions, and of course research, I think not just in tourism probably, but in most other fields, is perceived as irrelevant now that we're in this global crisis, this global collapse, which we've never really experienced before. The good news, however, is we're moving into this new phase. We're moving into this reorganization phase. Organization is when a system is starting out new. So we're reorganizing this system. So we're moving into this phase, and the major characteristics are that resilience will be increasing. That is the capacity to innovate and adapt. Everything kind of falls apart. It's that creative destruction. It's destroyed, and now there's the opportunity to create. The potential to use these accumulated resources, both the past resources and new resources that come into being, is considered quite high in this particular phase, because we are starting to build these innovative innovations. And then connectedness is considered very low. The capacity to control and manage is still very low. However, I see that as a good thing, because what that means is that we are free from old structures. We are free to start innovating and start doing new things, new creative things. Now, exactly where are we on this particular adaptive cycle? Maybe China and some East Asian countries might be over more here into the reorganization phase. I think sometimes I feel the US and I think Latin America, South America, we're still back here trying to struggle with this collapse, trying to manage it. So we're basically down here, even though I think a lot of people would hope that we're more up here and moving out of this and recovering as quickly as possible. So the challenge of being relevant in a rapidly shrinking world, that is what we're facing. This is a period of time-space compression. I think COVID-19 is a disease that comes out of this time-space compression, the world getting smaller and smaller. And as Marion said, we're very likely to see more things. They may not always be pandemics, but I think there's a lot of potential for different things that we don't know right now to really impact us on a global scale, if not just a regional scale. This time-space compression, people want instant information, instant access, and gratification. That's something we have to deal with. It's going to be increasing with time. It's due primarily to advances in technology, telecommunications technology and transportation technology. The other challenge we have for people like me is the painfully slow publication cycle for research journals. Submission to review is incredibly slow. Acceptance, at least it gets online, but acceptance to print is also something that I find very frustrating. So we have this, which makes it very hard to be current on what's happening now, because things are changing so rapidly, and I think are going to continue this way. And then the lack of credible, quick response scholarly outlets beyond the academic journals, social media, blogs, and webinars. The boom in webinars like this, I think, is really interesting, that there's so many webinars nowadays related to tourism. But then there's also this concern for research rigor that's associated with these things. So now that we're in this either in or entering this reorganization phase, what's required is creativity and innovation. That's what's required for success in this particular phase. It requires flexibility, openness, and appreciation of new ideas, diverse ways of thinking. Some values that I would like to throw out for what a new normal in this reorganization phase in particular should require. One is connection, that is feeling connected to the entire planet, to the oneness of everything, to feeling connected to other people who we cooperate with. The second is cooperation with the other. I think we have to tear down barriers between people who we think are neoliberal and opposed to us more sustainable people, right? That we have to start working together across those boundaries and celebrate diversity of this planet. And then I think we really need passion, but a particular type of passion. A passion for the planet, a passion for the other, not just ourselves, and a passion for truth over the self. I kind of consider this as a kind of global citizenship, how the planet is more important than our simple selves. So those are some values. I'm going to focus a little bit here with some suggestions on the flexibility and cooperation points here. So some new normal, some things I'm just going to throw out, you know, sort of a brain dump on things that we might be able to do to encourage cooperation. Abolish academic journal rankings. I think those separate people. They create divisions where I think we should not have divisions. If we want to have a creative, innovative process, we can't have these divisions. And also stop ranking faculty on these kinds of things. This discourages innovation and cooperation. Come up with some new rankings, perhaps based on creativity and cooperation. Well, contribution, of course. Whoops, where are those lines coming from? And then multidisciplinary or mixed methods research, not just for research, but for everything we do. This is, I think, something that Marian was focusing quite a bit. Quantitative and qualitative, but bringing together the arts, the physical and social sciences, and business. These are areas of cooperation. In terms of flexibility, some suggestions that I have, stop printing hard copies of journals, scholarly journals. This is one of my frustrations. I have all this huge backlog of articles and I want to get them out into a journal, but I have a limited number of pages into an issue. So everything should go online. We should allow unlimited number of issues, unlimited number of articles, unlimited number of papers. We could do that if we did not have paper copies of journals. So anyway. News media type reader, but have those kinds of abstracts to audiences. Many abstract journals, abstracts are only about 150 words. Maybe they should be a minimum of 500 words, but written for a non-academic audience. So some ideas for flexibility. My closing note. 10 years from now, in 2030, we will look back on today's tourism webinars and think, how quaint. They tried the best they could, but they had no idea how the world would change by 2030. Just one last note. 2011, less than 10 years ago, was the first time Tourism Geographies had an article available online. So things have changed a lot in these last 9 to 10 years. And I think it's going to change just as much in the next 10 years, and we have no idea what it's going to be. So we have to be as creative and open as possible to bringing this about. Okay, thank you.
Basic tourism opportunities. This work has been undertaken in collaboration with small charities in the UK and has informed their practices and programs as well as influencing policy on social tourism. He is currently co-editor-in-chief of Annals of Tourism Research. Welcome, Scott.
Thanks very much, Robert, and thank you very much for the invitation to join this this webinar. Am I sharing my screen with you? There it is. Yeah, I can see it. There. Thank you. Yes, really excited to be here to talk to you about this subject that I'm really passionate about, which is about the relevance and impact of research. And going last after Marion and Alan means that obviously some of the really meaty points have already been covered by both of those speakers. So maybe my take is probably slightly different though, in that, you know, I'd come to this problem from two directions really. You know, first of all is, you know, was it ever relevant? And why is that a problem, whether it's an issue or not, you know? And really that gets to the heart of what's the purpose of academic research? Should it really be about relevance? And if so, what type of relevance is important? So we start thinking about things like, you know, well, did Isaac Newton concern himself with the relevance of his discoveries or how they might be used? No, I don't think so. So, you know, we do academic research for a range of different purposes, and not all of that is or should be related to relevance. So there's quite a few recent articles and pieces out there that have talked about and discussed the impact agenda, which is what we talk about in the UK as the impact in relation to relevance. So Rodri Thomas has been working in this area for quite some time. And he highlighted in a recent paper in Tourism Management that presumed synergies between the industry and academic research are often problematic. And also things like, well, the academic identity is completely sometimes at odds with industry practice. So when we talk about, you know, sort of big categories of relevance of research to industry, I think as Marion already alluded to, we're talking about something that is, you know, industry writ large, but actually that means a multitude of very, very diverse stakeholders that really we could be engaging with, and often people are engaging with those stakeholders. And also, you know, we do need academic research and academics to be slightly separated, I think, from the industry, because we need them to provide a sort of bit of detached and critical perspective on maybe some of the worst excesses of capitalism. So we know that there are sort of backlash, or has been a backlash against tourism in the context of over-tourism, for example, and how excessive demand for tourism in specific types of consumer contexts or cities has really been problematic for local residents. And I think that academics have been at the forefront of some of those debates that have challenged really the way in which the industry has developed in some of the more sort of parasitic types of ways. But also there's, you know, we need academics to hold up a card to policymakers as well, and to really relate to some of the problems underpinning development agendas, which I think that we've in a unique position to do really. So this point that, you know, whether academic research should really be relevant all of the time to industry perspectives is a little bit disingenuous, I think. But what's caused this focus on impact, you know, on relevance? And really, if you think about it, a lot of it has been driven by ourselves. We've brought it on ourselves, really. And we're having this debate about it. And, you know, why aren't we so relevant to the industry? And yet, actually, this is driven internally through the marketization of higher education and this sort of performance management culture. And I think that this is related to something that Alan said towards the end of his presentation about, you know, monitoring performance and also getting rid of journal rankings. I'm not advocating getting rid of journal rankings, but I am advocating getting rid of how they are used in the assessment of the performance of academic researchers and their research output. So, you know, we've brought this on ourselves, but you know, why are we now more than ever expected to produce research that's relevant? Well, one of it is about demonstrating value for money. And we can see this in the context of, you know, my position as Associate Dean for Research. I'm having to think about and justify how much time we commit to research from our faculty and how we can make that and demonstrate that that is giving good value for the investment that we put into it. And I'm all for that. I think that that's really useful and important, okay? But then there's the stuff about assessing research performance, benchmarking and ranking of research. It can be important, it's competitive out there, but that sort of feeds into this marketization of culture. Oh, and I crossed out this last bit here because I think that, well, actually, you know, it's a bit self-serving, because when we think about the UK context and the last government research excellence framework, so the excellence, the assessment exercise that judges the quality of research in the UK, well, that cost £250 million, right? So we put an enormous amount of resource investment into this, and wouldn't it be better if it was directed into actually producing more research and funding more research rather than, you know, the measurement of it? So just to sort of track back, you know, what's the UK's impact agenda here? Well, in the REF, which is coming up in 2021, impact's defined as an effect on, a change or benefit to the economy, society, culture, public policy, or services, health, the environment, quality of life, but it's got to be beyond academia. So what do we learn from this? And that is that impact or relevance can be really, really broad. It can mean lots and lots of different things to lots of different people. So I think that you know, when we're talking about impact, it's a lot more nuanced. It gives us a lot of, it gives us a lot of opportunity to explore different ways and means of producing relevant research. And I think that that relates to something that Marion said about the interdisciplinarity of tourism. So if we can define our audience, the communities of interest that might be benefit from our research, then in lots of different ways that might have real impacts. And we think about how research is measured. Well, that's in terms of research reach, understood as the extent or diversity of the beneficiaries of the impact, so who's benefiting, and also the significance, so how wide is that impact. So what are the factors, though, that influence the development of, or the production of, impactful research? Well, a very recent article in Tourism Management analyses that REF 2014 impact case studies, and actually found a very, very strong correlation between the research environment, the institutional culture, and the research impact score, or the quality of the research that's able to be produced within that research environment. So when we're thinking about, well, how can we make our research relevant to various different stakeholders, we've got to look to ourselves, look to those internal cultures and say, well, have we got the right environment to support the translation of our research and our ability to share those research findings with lay or practitioner audiences? And I think that Alan pointed to a few ways in which you can do that by producing short abstracts and making them available through social media or through conversation or online sources and so on. But often as academics, we're not naturally tuned in to being able to do that. So we need guidance, help, support, funding, all of these different things that will help us actually address this. And really, we need a realistic strategy within the team to develop collaboration with external partners to deliver impact within our university departments and teams. But I want to just draw back a little bit and say, well, isn't it also beholden upon the industry to think about how they can collaborate with academics and academic departments? And I just looked at a little bit of economics research, and okay, I'm not an economist, all right, so you have to forgive me on this one. But I found a paper in the American Economic Review, right, that looked at whether there were any spillovers from university research to commercial innovation. In other words, do the co-location or the location of university departments lead to spin-overs in commercial innovation or IP or incubator startups and so on? And you know, you've only got to think about Silicon Valley. It's no coincidence that it's located near MIT and Stanford. But yeah, they found that spillovers do exist, but they're quite limited actually to specific areas like drugs, chemicals, and actually STEM subjects are much more suited to the wide-scale impact and synergies between R&D and IP innovation development transfer from universities to businesses. And we only have to think about tourism as being completely separate or dislocated in terms of where the academic research is produced and the output or the benefit that can be realized in some of those communities. So the impact and the university being close together is an issue that isn't really going to happen. So should we consider relevance in our post-COVID tourism research environment? And you know, this is something that I think about in relation to training ECRs, okay? You know, only offer what you can usefully contribute. I think Marion alluded to this in her presentation as well. You know, is there something there that we can do that actually we can contribute to usefully? At the moment, there's this sense of panic and meltdown across the industry as they can't really cope. They're adjusting to things. So what realistically can we do to help these businesses in this type of environment? And also consider the scale and the scope of the impact that you can really achieve. You know, I'm working with local DMOs, and they know that a lot of their staff are on furloughs. And what we have is sort of time. We can give some time. We can help coordinate. We can host web surveys. We can do things with them. But if this is sort of local and small scale, it's not on the big industry picture. A really big important issue is that we can acknowledge that practitioner-oriented problems might not lead to the highest quality outputs, okay? We can't make really, really relevant research in collaboration with industry that always achieves really 4-star research journal outputs, okay? So you have to think about the balance between your need as a researcher for high quality research outputs, academic research, and getting impactful, relevant research. So thinking about quality versus quantity and this trade-off there is really important. And consider the types of resources that academics can offer that other stakeholders can't. So coordinating, I'm doing some work at the moment trying to coordinate DMO activity, which they just haven't got the time and resources to be able to do themselves. And I know that my 10 minutes are up, so I'm just going to finish with a very short plug for Annals, obviously, because when Sarah Dolnikar and I took over, we really wanted to push the types of research forward that Annals publishes. And you can see that one of our key criteria here is relevance. You know, we need to make sure that papers are relevant to a defined community of interest, whether that's the academy, policymakers, tourism industry, or a local population, or whatever it is, whatever those broad interests are. And that should be immediately relevant in the article. And we're not going to make it a condition, like Marion was talking to about the JTR guidelines, that every paper should relate to post-COVID world. but also we're trying to make sure that our initial submission to acceptance rates are really, really quick and fast. So you know that you could, if you submit an article to Annals, you will be almost guaranteed, well, our average turnaround rate to a first decision is less than 8 weeks. So we hope that we can really overcome some of those problems that Alan was alluding to in terms of speed and timeliness of research publicity. Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Scott. Let me use this background and fill up the rest of our Q&A. Well, my key takeaway from all three distinguished speakers, number one, that relevance is not just narrowly defined as relevance to industry practitioners. There are different types of relevance, and there are also different audience and consumers of this research. So there are different type of constituencies for our research. And also, some fields are probably doing better than others in producing relevant research. So let me be very blunt here. Does the tourism field have a relevance issue? Do we have a problem with relevance? Please.
Well, let me give a first stab at it, and then hopefully my colleagues will pipe up as well. If you haven't read Bruce Poon-Tipp's Insta book, because he's created this term, self-published, free access, called Unlearn. And if you're not familiar with Bruce Poon-Tipp, he is the CEO, president of G-Adventures, which is the world's largest sort of adventure tour company, small groups, very high end. It's a social entrepreneurship, but incredibly successful. And so he talks about this pandemic and what it has done to him as a businessman, because he needs to rethink everything. It really is, it's a quick read, 24 pages. It's very insightful. Go download it. But he talks about, and of course he travels incessantly, but he talks about the beginning of this pandemic and how it sort of creeped up on us. And even him, who happened to be in Asia at the time, he said he was talking to people in Thailand about the tsunami, and we all remember that, right? And he talked about how they described what had happened with the eerie quiet, and then suddenly that beach that sort of stretched forever and they could see corals, and then they were starting to pick up a sense of unease and started to call friends and family, and then the wave came, right? And he said, and this is like the pandemic. They were talking about this, and he was in Australia giving some sort of conference, and he said, and everybody kept asking him about COVID, and he said, Australia had like 4 cases, and this is what everybody was talking about. And so I think many of us feel the same way. When this happened, and Alan talked about the conversation, and I wrote one of the early articles on the impact on tourism, but this was back in February, early March, before we actually understood, before we had any of the border closures, anything like that. And here we are, oh, you are the tourism expert. Please tell us what the impact is going to be. And I kept saying, I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know about the rest of you, but I don't. And so understanding in hindsight, yeah, maybe we should have. We should have known, but we didn't. So are we relevant? No more than anyone else. Right? And I think Scott was saying that, really, no more than anyone else. We can only do what we can do.
I think that, if we look at the tourism community, I don't think that there's any big difference really within, to business schools. I'm working in a big business school, and I think that business schools have the same set of issues really. So we might have a relevance problem, but we're sharing the same relevance problem that many different disciplines within the social sciences are also doing. And not everybody can be doing impactful research all of the time. What we do have a problem with, I think, is a volume problem. We've got far too much research that's being produced within academic departments, which is not used, which is not read, and which is not useful. And that is really an issue that we've created as well, partly by ourselves. So, I think that we've got to focus more on quality and a smaller amount of publications, and probably doing something that's a bit more diverse than just trying to work out a publication strategy that's based on lots and lots of outputs that are, looking at data in particular ways and recycling data from one study and trying to get lots and lots of different papers out of it. I think that is part of the problem here about relevance, is that we've just got too much in the system, academic research.
So I would think pretty much every article that I receive for tourism geographies is relevant to somebody. The question is it relevant to what I perceive my audience, for that journal to be? And that's basically what a major decision that I try to make in deciding whether or not to move forward with a paper. But every paper, I think, people spend a lot of time on these papers, that their research that they're doing, and it means something to them. To me, I think we need to have a better way of structuring our journals so that people know that if this is a paper they wrote, it's really something of interest to people in a particular country, a particular region, but maybe not the whole globe. And so that we can focus articles to find their relevance. And so I think that's one of the biggest problems, is we have this small set. I mean, it's growing, but it's still a relatively small set of papers that are SSCI, journals that are SSCI, and everybody wants to get into those. To me, I think we should blow the whole thing up and have as many journals that are specialized and focused in particular areas where people can focus that interest, publish that interest, share that interest with other people who are really into that particular topic, which I might not be. So.
Well, thank you. I agree with all of you by saying that we have different types of relevance that we have, and then this some of the research has contributed to the larger society in different ways. But for a professional applied, quote unquote, applied field, we have some special connection with the industry. And for example, part of our the TTRA's primary mission is to build that academic practitioner connection and collaboration. And one good example, let me just share on the chat, is the chat page, is that the efforts led by Professor Sue Beaton and her team about building a research agenda for TTRA. So, but over the years, do you think that this kind of collaboration between academics and the industry is declining, or is about the same, or is actually increasing? And if we add another factor to this, we now have this cohort called Generation T, the younger generation of tourism scholars who get their academic training primarily from the tourism field. They don't have a mother discipline, so to speak, so they were trained primarily, purely from the academic field. And it would arguably, they are the one that probably struggle the most in terms of seeking their identity and navigating their way in this pandemic. What is your advice to them?
Oh, I'm going to go first. Is that okay? So I I think that this is a benefit, actually. I think that there are lots of people lots of researchers based in different academic disciplines that are interested in tourism, and they're interested in seeking collaboration with tourism scholars. And so, I think that we're uniquely placed because we're not in, a great silo. And tourism is this sort of wonderful field of discovery that can be looked at from sociological perspective, psychological perspective, environmental science, political science, and so on. And so there's a lot of interest out there, I think, in being able to join up with different researchers within those core or different types of disciplinary backgrounds. And I think that helps, but obviously we've got to have the confidence to be able to go out there and build those bridges and those connections between different researchers and different disciplines. And I think that sometimes that can be a problem, that we just don't have the confidence to do that and look a bit insularly rather than looking externally to those disciplines. And I think it might be helpful to be able to do that. And often I think that one way that you can do that is through these collaborations and partnerships with local stakeholders or NGOs or industry community and so on. That can be a way in, a link, a bridge between these interdisciplinary collaborations and industry or stakeholder collaborations as well.
Yes, I would echo that, because it is one of the advantages we have. We have those connections very often. We have the in, whether it is with businesses or the government agencies, NGOs, and other researchers in social sciences very often do not. And they come to us and sort of say, can you help me with this research? Because I would like to have access to whatever. So we actually provide a really valuable service to others and then collaborate.
Well, if we take a look at the chat, you can see a lot of our attendees were, participating and sharing their opinions and sharing their thoughts. I think one common question I got is about the pre-COVID-19 research. Let me just, read one of the questions. The future course and impacts of COVID-19 on tourism are still to be judged. So much of research has been published on post-COVID-19 tourism scenario. Much of the current tourism research predictions may be irrelevant in the future scenarios. How will it affect the trustworthiness of tourism research? And I would also add that how should we do with our data, our research being conducted before COVID-19? Thank you.
So I remember reading that message when it popped up on the screen and trying to think in my mind exactly what would be a good example of that. I don't think, COVID-19 has impacted the world, it's impacted global economy, maybe it's impacted individuals. I would like to hope it's impacted individuals, that they're thinking more about their impacts on the world and how they might align their lifestyles to be more in line with the planet.
Is it just me, or has Alan gone
but
like
people
in the bath?
Substantially changed. COVID-19 might change some of the structures that we operate within. I'm not exactly sure that it necessarily has to be a significant change to most research. There's probably some out there that is really somehow very particular and has been changed by COVID-19. On tourism geographies, I have a little statement saying, if it's relevant, maybe you can make a statement about how your future research might change because of COVID-19. But it's only if you feel it's really relevant, or if the reviewers feel it's relevant.
Thank you, Marianne or Scott.
Yeah, well, there is a lot of speculation, right, as to what the impact of COVID-19 is going to be on that research. So just to give you one example, because we are writing a book chapter out of a master's thesis on backpacking in China. Fairly new market, expanding very rapidly, online survey, you know, the usual. And the question we are asking is, so is anything going to change? Well, you need to dig back into the culture, that collective culture in China, Confucius base, that has influenced even how they backpack. Will COVID-19 change that? Some aspects perhaps will be reinforced, others will not change. So just the reflection on what might be, it's all speculation. And right now, people are uncertain. They are insecure themselves. They don't know. We see this with the sentiment studies coming out of the States every single week, how people are changing. Yes, they are dreaming about going on vacation. Are they booking? No, not really. Certainly not for the next 6 months, right? I mean, we're seeing all of this. So to ask a researcher who's just finished a study and is trying to publish to predict the impact of COVID-19 on their research, a little bit unfair because it's so speculative.
Yeah, I think I can say one thing as well, is that, you know, out of this type of situation, it's like, you know, it's like a phoenix, really. It just sort of triggers a massive response. And we have been inundated with new papers of all sorts of different types at the journals that I'm involved with. But also you can see all of these call for papers being advertised on TriNet and so on. And I think it's hugely important that an event like this creates a huge surge of interest and new research opportunities and creative thought processes amongst academic researchers. And I think that that's what we should be looking to, really. Not looking to all of that research that has gone before, because I think that that has its place, okay? And as research is coming through, you know, I've got PhD students that are partway through their thesis, trying to think about, well, should we try and redesign our research or research questions to fit what's happening at the moment? But it's not necessary, as Marianne says, in every case, and it's really, you know, not possible in some cases either. But actually looking to the future to see how, you know, the whole world is changing, and that is creating a lot of new research questions that are going to have an immense impact in terms of the amount of creative, new, innovative ideas that are coming forward for the future. And as Alan said, I think that we just need to harness some of that stuff to become a bit more responsible, you know, to try and influence policy to be a bit more sustainable, greener travel solutions and so on going forward. It's a sort of one-time opportunity, I think, that we've got.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Well, it's hard to believe that 1 hour passed so fast. I feel like that I just started and I still have 45 questions to shoot. And also, if you look at the chat page, we also have lots of very interesting, inspiring questions. But due to the time constraints, let me ask each of our panelists to just wrap up this with one piece of advice to the fellow tourism researchers, please. One thing that you would like to suggest about post-COVID-19 research, or something else?
All right, presumably we're going in the same order that we started. My advice is the same as it was before COVID, and that is build your networks. Reach out to other disciplines. Don't try and do it all by yourself. Nobody is that knowledgeable. Use the networks and make them stronger and make them international. I mean, we have that wonderful opportunity that truly tourism is in every country of the world. So reach out,
Thank you.
So I want to go back to the word passion. Sarah Dolnikar mentioned the importance of passion in research in her last TTRA, in the last TTRA webinar. And I totally agree with that. To me, in advising students in particular, that's what I've always done my whole life, is tell them that that's what I've done my whole life, is followed my passion, and they should do the same. What I found, what in the special issue of COVID-19 that I recently put together, people are passionate about this. It's affecting everybody, and it's drawing out passions. And so I think we should just pursue that. And I think we're, like Scott said, we're going to come up with some really interesting stuff here in the next couple of years. I'm kind of looking forward to it. So that's what I'm hoping everyone will be as passionate about, the kind of world they want to see, and pursue that in their research.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, Alan just stole my takeaway, so I'm going to say, particularly for ECRs, I think it's important to think strategically. There's so many demands on researchers' time to be excellent teachers, excellent researchers, now to do excellent knowledge exchange and knowledge transfer as well. So you have to think about how you're going to balance all of these things together. People at different stages in their careers, the expectations are different. But particularly for ECRs, it's about, it is about passion. Only do the things that you're really passionate about, but also think strategically about how you can build, relevance into your research. It's not going to happen straight away. It takes it step by step, and eventually you'll get there.
Well, thank you so much for your wonderful insights. On behalf of all our attendees, I would like to thank once again to Professor Marian Jobe, Professor Alan Liu, and Professor Scott McCabe for your time and efforts in speaking in this webinar. I would also like to thank all our attendees for taking your time to participate in this. I know some of them have to overcome major time difference to be here. And finally, we would like to thank the staff and students of Temple University's U.S. Asia Center for Tourism and Hospitality Research and TTRA for facilitating this event. Thanks, everybody. Please enjoy the rest of your day. Wherever you are, please stay healthy, safe, and positive. Thank you.
Thank you.